here we go with Hot Sheet on the Baseball America YouTube channel or wherever you get your pods. What's up? Scotty Braun, JJ Cooper, Geoff Pontes with you. And this was a big, big week. I know we're a few days away from it, or a few days after it, so it already feels like it was a million years ago with the way the news cycle flows. But we were excited to watch the Paul Skenes debut. This is where it all comes full circle. You had last year's number one overall pick. Just last year, less than a year ago, he was selected first in the draft by the Pirates, and then he's already up in the big leagues. That's cool. We're covering him and the rest of the Pirates organization. So let's hit our first move right off the jump, because we're going to do a deep dive on the Pittsburgh Pirates organization and what else they have aside from Skenes. All right, so JJ, first off, let's start with Skenes. How cool was it for you to be able to watch him pitch? What were your thoughts on his performance? And did watching him give you any indicators on how his stuff is going to play in the big leagues?
I mean, how fun was that? It really is. I can't think of a pitching debut. You probably do have to go back to Steven Strasburg to kind of come back to one that was that hyped, that exciting. And the thing that kind of first stood out to me was just looking at those Pirates fans and how excited they were up on their feet in the first inning. I feel like if he'd have just gotten one more strike to Cody Bellinger, in good at bat by Cody Bellinger, but that stadium would have blown the non-existent roof off. But 101, 102 is 101, 102. Not surprisingly, that's going to play really well. The big thing I think that we're just going to need to see going forward, which I expect we will see, is take him out of that first start, and we're going to see a little bit less of that adrenaline, a little less of that amped up nature, and maybe a little bit more fastball command because of that. And if we see more fastball command, we see more command. I felt like at times in that game, he was kind of relying on his secondaries because I don't feel like he felt comfortable that he wasn't going to overthrow his fastball. As that comes along, yeah, this is going to be a guy, that Geoff is the guy that you've seen multiple times over the years, going back to when he was a rising sophomore at Air Force.
Yeah, I mean, he was just fresh off his freshman season at Air Force. The first time I saw Skenes, actually, he was a hitter. And, it was Pete Flaherty, who now is with us, but at that point was the scout liaison at Katuitt. And he was like, hey, you got to pay attention to this guy. He's a pitcher and a catcher. He's, 6'6". Obviously, a guy like that stands out in a ball field. We don't see height like that often. But got to see him pitch later that week out of the bullpen. Went to Team USA, then came back. And I think the remarkable thing is just how much his mechanics have evolved. He's become a better mover, more consistent mover. I think the other side of it, too, is just how much the pitch mix has evolved. We see a variety of off-speed pitches that we weren't seeing a few years ago. In terms of the fastball, I mean, he's just continued to add velocity. I was at a game and I had the game, the Skenes start also going on my phone, like sort of in the cup holder. And I think you're right. I think at times it looked like he was overthrowing the fastball a little bit. Command wasn't as sharp, but I think we see that often the first few starts for guys, not even just the first one, where adrenaline's up, they're amped up, they haven't sort of settled into the routine yet of Major League life and that sort of thing. But I'm excited to see it because, as you said, he was only a couple pitches away from potentially, putting up some zeros. I mean, even that home run he gave up was a wall scraper.
Okay, so we like to do this on foul territory and just project way ahead and put pressure on with questions. So, JJ, I don't think we would expect to even ask this question before the season starts, but you do have a month and a half of work from Jared Jones, mostly very successful. Over the next 10 years, which pitcher would you rather have? Which pitcher will have the better run, Jared Jones or Paul Skenes?
I like both of them, but I'm still going to go Skenes. I think, for one, the durability that he's already demonstrated going back to his time at LSU. He was a true front of the rotation horse there. I expect him to be that true front of the rotation horse in the big leagues. It's nothing against Jones, but Jones is obviously a significantly smaller pitcher. That can have some advantages to it. It's a little bit easier sometimes to stay in the delivery and all. But when you talk about big dudes who should be able to hold up, Skenes is that guy. When you ask scouts kind of to draw up what a number one starter looks like, body type wise and all, it's going to be a little bit more Skenes. And especially because even as big as he is, He does have that agility. He does have that athleticism. He's not just a big donkey. I'm going to go Skenes for those reasons. Although, again, this is a question that probably doesn't have a whole lot of wrong answers to it. But what do you think, Jeff?
Yeah, I'd go on the opposite side of this. I'd actually say Jones. Love the fastball shape. It's an incredible slider as well. We've seen this work against major league competition for a little bit longer, obviously, than we have with Skenes, and that's not a knock on Skenes. I just think the ceiling is higher, frankly, in a lot of ways. And I know we said it early on in the season. I think he comps very, very cleanly to sort of Spencer Strider, and if it's the same sort of deal where you get a couple of elite seasons and then some injuries, I'm sort of okay kind of risking that versus I still have, questions about where Skenes goes in terms of the fastball shape and the command and like, does it really work against major league pitching? Major league hitters. So that's kind of what my question is, but I think it's a pick 'em. I mean, when it comes down to it, it's a personal preference thing, like my short right-handers with the high ride fastballs. That's my jam.
Okay, so now let's extend this to the rest of the Pirates org, right? Because the first overall pick steps up to the show. Pirates fans are looking for a sign. It's been a lot of losing for a while again for this franchise, JJ. Are you seeing it with the young talent on the big league roster and what's on the way in the farm system?
I'm seeing half of it. I think on the pitching side, you have to look at this and say, any team that could produce Jones and Skenes in the same year, add that to a Keller who's been there for a little while now, but they've got Quinn Priester, they got Bubba Chandler, they got Anthony Solomedo. They've got guys coming on the pitching side where you look at this and say the foundation is there. And again, in the case of Jones, he's already pitching for them in the big leagues. In the case of Skenes, he's just reached the big leagues. So that's all there. But then the question becomes, okay, that's half of it, but what about the lineup? And when it comes to lineup, there's a lot more concerns because, yes, the Pirates have been pretty pitcher heavy, I would say, in the draft in recent years. They've made moves. Even when they took Henry Davis 1-1, part of that was to go on an underslot deal that was going to then pay off in being able to kind of add some high upside, high price pitchers later on in that draft. But Henry Davis, number one pick in the draft not that long ago, and still young, but demoted, and I think does face real questions, even maybe less so about his bat, even though he was demoted, hitting, I believe, 160. But I think the bat might be okay long term. There's still questions about his defense, I think, at catcher. And then if you move him to the outfield, then there are questions about his bat. Tamar Johnson, another very high pick, struggling in high A, and it's kind of a bat first profile. So he really needs to hit, not hitting a whole lot. And then you just look at this big league lineup that they have right now, and you've got O'Neal Cruz, who was a trade acquisition, but admittedly a trade acquisition very young in his career, his minor league career. You look around the rest of this, Brian Hayes, and then you kind of run out of homegrown guys who've come up in the last few years pretty quickly. Nick Gonzalez is kind of getting a second chance, but I just need to see a little bit more on the offensive side to feel like that this is a team that's really on the rise. Or if not, they're going to have to spend some money to fill out the lineup while they have, save the money because they're going to have a really good homegrown rotation.
Yeah, I think that's the tricky thing when we talk about the Pirates is, they've had some high picks with pitchers that have certainly worked out. I think another name that could be sort of waiting in the wings the next couple of years is Bubba Chandler, who's really interesting. Braxton Ashcraft had 10 strikeouts today in a bottom of the ninth loss for the Double-A team. So they do have some arm talent. I think just throughout the organization, there's a variety of sort of relief types that I think could be pretty good. But they've spent high draft capital to try to acquire hitters. Henry Davis is one you mentioned. Nick Gonzalez is another one. Tamar Johnson. So it's not like they haven't gone out and spent, top 10 draft capital to get, high name players in the draft. They just haven't developed any of these guys, and they all sort of fit into like different prototypes too in terms of the types of draft guys. Tamar Johnson, we heard about how it was one of the best prep hit tools of all time, and it seems like it's a below average hit tool in pro ball. Nick Gonzalez, I think, was kind of similar, ripped up the Cape up here with an MVP season, one of the best Cape seasons of all time. He was a hit tool first guy, and it's kind of been the opposite in pro ball. And Henry Davis, between catching and hitting, has never really found his footing. So you have to have some questions just about the development on the back end with Pirates, on the hitting side at least.
And that's kind of, I think, the long term question we got to look here. The Athletic did a good story, I think, a couple months ago now about kind of the differing opinions. We've heard some of this as well, kind of like that on the hitting side, that there's kind of some mixed messaging that's been going on at times, in the farm system and all like that. And the reality of it is, at the end of the day, your resume is your resume. And when you are taking top end picks, not every one of them is going to work out. I would say, like, we talked about Termarr Johnson, but the tough one about that one is there's a whole lot of picks at the top of that draft. You look at that top 10 from that draft, and once you get past Jackson Holiday, you've got a Cade Horton, and there's a whole lot of other picks in that top 10 where you're like, ooh, they probably would like to have that to do over again. So it's not like this is something that's just entirely the Pirates. However, I do think that when you look at it, you would say that Pittsburgh has to produce more, even if we're not even talking about impact bats, solid regulars, because they just really don't have a whole lot of hitting success stories. And here we are. This is the team that has the pitching, I say right now, going forward to be a contender. You put that together, you gotta score enough runs for that to matter.
Yeah, I think Marlins. I mean, they had a really nice core of pitching, and they did not add the hitting, whether it's through the farm system or through free agency. They did not want to go there, JJ, and now they're basically starting up again. You have to sync this all together. That's the thing too, right? Everything has to sync timing-wise. It can't be like, wow, we're great at run prevention, but we can't hit. That doesn't create a winner. You can't do that in Major League Baseball. Everything has to time out. And if the timing's not working with the player development system, then you do have to supplement that via signing players or trades.
And the other thing I would say with that, the Marlins are an instructive example of this as well, which is, if you're going with a very pitching heavy approach, the thing that's always the danger is like, okay, you could look great, and then all of a sudden Sandy Alcantara goes down, or a Yuri Perez goes down, and all of a sudden you're like, oh yeah, we're not nearly as good for this upcoming year as we thought we were going to be because of that. Kind of have that a lot more on the pitching side than the hitting. But again, if you sync this all up, the Pirates do have kind of more room for hope here than they've had in a while, because they do have the potential to have a absolutely legit, like a top 3, a top 4 in the rotation to envy. When you look at the rest of the division, or even really the rest of the National League, that could happen here. But you're going to have to score some runs. And right now, when you look at it, it's like, okay, O'Neal Cruz could develop into a star. That's not crazy hope. Brian Reynolds can be a solid, a solid regular at least, if not a little bit better than that at times. But here's the thing: at the end of the day, you got to bring some other help for that, and they're going to need a Nick Gonzalez or a Henry Davis or an Andy Rodriguez, who is hurt this year. Don't want to forget about him. But guys like that, they need some of those guys to step up, and so far they're not seeing that.
Yep. It's a division that's not the AL East, or even, say the NL East, or even maybe the NL West or AL West, but it's not a pushover
either. Or the AL Central.
Yeah.
The AL Central with 4 teams at 500 or better.
It's early on that one, I will say, if we're doing that conversation. It's early. But point is, the Cubs should be on the rise, and especially if you watch and pay attention to this show and the rest of your Baseball America content, the Brewers have some really nice players that are coming through right now. So it's not a pushover division for the Pirates, like, oh, we can just tank for 5-6 years and we'll naturally kind of raise to the top, float to the top. All right, let's get to Helium Spot and cover some other top-end prospects. Here we go, Jeff. We're going to focus on early exit velocity standouts. So I want guys that are 90th percentile plus, if possible, with hitting stats. Who are you seeing that's just smacking the crap out of the baseball in the minor leagues, and you think that will ultimately potentially convert into a solid major league regular?
Yeah, there's a few, and we'll get into some of the guys who I think are absolute slam dunk major league regulars. But I think the most interesting player that I wrote about in this article that I put out last week was Twins non-drafted free agent, I guess we'll call it, but he's really an indie ball free agent by the name of Carson McCusker. Bounced around a little bit in college, spent some time, I believe, at Oklahoma State. Didn't get drafted. Actually, a teammate of Kumar Rocker's up with Tri-City in the Independent League when Rocker didn't go to return to Vanderbilt after he got drafted with the Mets, and then whole snafu. He was a teammate with him then. Spent 3 years there. The exit velocities are incredible. He's up in AA right now, Wichita. A guy that there's definitely some questions in terms of swing and miss, just to put it out there. It is a 37% miss rate, which is extremely high, 26% zone. He doesn't chase all that much, but the exit velocity, it's the highest 90th percentile exit velocity in the minor leagues right now among qualified hitters. It's a 111.7 mile per hour, 90th percentile. And that's the 10th percentile ball when we look at there are 100 batted balls in play for a particular player, just to explain it. It would be like the 10th highest sort of exit velocity. So it gives you an idea of what the top end is. This is a guy that has Stantonian sort of output when it comes to power. He's also 6'8". So he's a really interesting prospect, a little bit older, obviously, had an unusual journey, but that's what baseball and following the minor leagues is all about, is sort of finding these, hidden gems that have these outlier skills and abilities. And kind of reminds me of Trey Cabbage, who was a favorite of JJ and I over the last couple of years because of his outstanding velocities.
He took the words right out of my mouth. I mean, that's what I was going to say is that I love a guy like Trey Cabbage like this. Not that Trey Cabbage has become a star in the big leagues, but Trey Cabbage has proven to be a big leaguer. And this was a guy who was a minor league free agent. Like when you hit the ball this hard, people are going to pay attention. And it's not often that you can say for a guy with this kind of resume, this kind of profile, that there's a chance he could reach the majors. And I think McCusker is a guy like that. But Jeff, okay, now that we've told the good story, who are the studs who you're really excited about?
Yeah, I think the two guys that kind of stand out for me, and if you're in any kind of a fantasy league, dynasty, they're probably rostered, but I think James Wood and Orelvis Martinez, both sort of ripping up the International League right now. Younger players that do have a decent sample size now of AAA experience, more for Martinez than there is for Wood. But when we look at sort of some of the top exit velocity standouts, Martinez is there. I think a lot of what it is with Martinez is he started to balance the approach a little bit more. He's not chasing outside of the zone at the rate that he used to. That's continued to tick up each of the last couple of years. But it's also his angles. He's always had a knack for finding the barrel, even in his sort of lowest lows. He was a guy that hit 30 home runs in AA as a 20-year-old. He's got a 451 WOBA on contact, or WOBACon, if you like that one. He's a guy that really stands out just in terms of not only hitting the ball hard, but hitting the ball at good angles, which allows him to hit more doubles, more home runs, more power output overall. And then we take a look at James Wood and just what he's done this year from an approach standpoint. The approach is always pretty good. He's actually swinging a little bit more this year, chasing just a little bit more, but he's swinging and missing less. He's swinging and missing less in zone. He actually has a 17% in zone miss rate, which is really low for somebody that has the sort of exit velocities that he has. He's pushing up on 110 miles per hour right now in his 90th percentile exit velocity. It's a 109.8. That's obviously outstanding. I think it's not a matter of sort of if, but when this guy gets called up to the big leagues. And I think it's sort of similar for Elvis. If there's an injury, these are guys that I think almost immediately could potentially get called up. A little bit more tricky with Wood because he needs to be added to the 40-man roster, but Elvis has already been sitting there. And then the last guy that I'm going to highlight is somebody who I think the slash line numbers haven't necessarily caught up to what we're seeing on the back end. That's Roman Anthony of the Red Sox. Anthony is a guy that sort of did this last year where he teased us with really good data. The underlying stats were awesome, but he wasn't giving us the kind of production that we expected until he got that promotion to high A. I think some of it's probably the weather. This is a southern Florida guy. It's used to the warm weather, but he's hitting the ball really hard. 109.6 mile per hour, 90th percentile exit velocity. His zone miss, not all that different from James Wood, 17.6% zone whiff. And then the chase is actually really low, 20.4% chase rate. I think it's just a matter of some things coming around, balls sort of dropping in play that, maybe he's had some bad luck on. But I think we're going to see Anthony really surge over the next couple of months. and really, sort of assert himself as that number one Red Sox prospect as he battles it out with Kyle Teel and Marcelo Mayer all hitting back to back to back in that Portland Sea Dogs lineup.
It's hard for me not to think when I see that Portland lineup. It was more years ago than I want to like to admit at this point, but we had that in Greenville with the Red Sox many years ago. We had Moncada, we had Devers, we had Benintendi, Michael Chavis, I think, was the fourth guy in that. Yeah, and so I think you put it all together. That's one of those kind of you love when you see these kind of prospect clusters like that, because it's both encouraging, but it's also something where there are guys who are getting accustomed to each other on the way up. Now, not all of them end up being on the same team. We saw that in the case of that previous one where Moncada was at the end of the day ended up being part of the trade. But it's the kind of thing that you always love to see stuff like that.
And I'll say this about James Wood when you spoke about him. We had a conversation with him. If you want to check that out, you can check out the podcast, just backtrack a little bit. You can also check out the show on YouTube if you're listening right now. Just type in James Wood Baseball America. It'll pop up for you. And if there are any other requests for prospects that you would like us to speak with, let us know. You can drop it in the YouTube chat or send us a note in a variety of other ways, and we'll try and get them on the show. Okay, let's finish today's show with the new metrics that are sweeping baseball right now, front offices, and they're external too for fans to enjoy. And it has to do with bat speed, swing path, contact on the bat barrel, etc., sweet spot contact. So let's go big picture first, and then we'll lock in on a certain player. JJ, what do you think of these stats? Do they excite you? Are you needing more? Just give me your overall analysis and how you would rate what we're now going to bring to the table, another tool to measure players.
So let me start with, this is probably too much information with how my mind works, but this went live Sunday night at 8:00, because they had the ESPN game and they were going to talk about it on the ESPN game. So starting at about 8:00, I just start pouring through it. And by the end of the night, I think I'd written 3 stories off of it, or most of them. I'd spent probably 4.5 hours kind of diving through this and all, because yes, the best way I can put it is being able to measure more is always better for me than being able to measure less. Being able to quantify things that we kind of knew but weren't fully quantifiable before, always enjoyable, always beneficial. Now, that being said, the thing that I know that can be kind of a tightrope to walk with this is I'm sure we're going to start seeing a lot more of this on broadcast and things like that. And I do get that there are a lot of fans for whom a little is a lot. You don't want too much of this. But the key thing I think that the thing that stands out to me about all of this is what I'm excited to what we don't know yet that we'll learn. Because going forward, I think what we're going to see is much like if a pitcher 15 years ago, 20 years ago, if a pitcher was hurt or a pitcher had a significant velo decline or increase, you kind of didn't really know unless you're at the ballpark and happen to have scouting out a radar gun or talk to one who did. But now we know that kind of in game pretty much. We're going to see this with bat speed also. We're going to see at the start of the year who has bat speed increases, who has bat speed declines, who has bat speed increases but their contact rate goes down, who's able to sustain the swing decisions and the contact and all that and have increased bat speed. The things like this that we're going to be able to see going forward, I think, are important. And I think also, though, that this kind of a word of caution with this is bat speed's important for a hitter, but it's one part of it. If you have bat speed, you don't have hand-eye coordination, barrel control. You don't have timing. All you're going to do is strike out in a more ferocious way than you would with less bat speed. So it's a piece, it's a component. And the other caution I would have with this is we're going to find, as we kind of dive through this, everyone who's now doing this because it's public data, that some of the stats we have here are really useful, some are less useful, some might need to be improved. If you think back a few years ago, we saw 5-star, 4-star, 3-star catches, coming out of StatCast data, and then that kind of went away. As we learn things, we're going to learn, hey, I'm really interested, we're going to talk a little bit more about swing length, but already even a couple days in, kind of realizing, wait a second, but with swing length, there's a certain bias to that because a guy who goes to the opposite field a lot is going to have a shorter swing length than a guy who pulls the ball a lot. Because if you just simply think about it, as the bat comes through the zone, it takes longer for the barrel to get there to point of contact if you pull the ball. So there's a lot of stuff like that that we're learning, that we're going to dive in, and I think it's going to be really fun to figure all this out, but it's going to take a lot of time to figure this all out.
So let me zone in on a player, and you can mix in your thoughts overall on the stats that have been released. But Jeff, Wyatt Langford's been talked about a ton for years through the Baseball America publications and subscription, if you have one, and on shows, right? Makes it up this year. A Rookie of the Year favorite for many. Struggles up the jump, gets hurt. What do you see from his data, for example, that we could maybe take and say, okay, I see blank that I didn't see in the past?
Yeah, I mean, it's, unusual. He's got a really short swing, but also one of the fastest bats in the major leagues. So, I think sort of looking at that, looking at some of just the underlying surface level numbers, strikeout rate, walk rate, chase rates, swinging strike rates, contact rates, that sort of thing. I think all the key ingredients are there. It's just one of those sort of early slumps that we see from time to time with top prospects. And it's so early in the season. I know we do have a decent chunk now, but, most of the season is still to happen. Guys can get hot, things click in, and all of a sudden we're looking back and like, hey, remember when he was bad for a month, or, the ball wasn't dropping? And I know there's been a lot made about the questionable calls he's got in the fringes of the zone, because he is particular about what he does swing at. So I think it's one of these players where, I still believe there's no reason to not buy into sort of the hype and everything that we read and thought about this guy in the offseason. He's struggling just in the TV league, and it's a matter of making his adjustments. And I think we'll see that. And frankly, under the hood, there's not a whole lot going wrong. It kind of reminds me a little bit of when we initially saw guys like Dustin Pedroia get called up and struggle for a month and then, took off. And another guy that comes to mind is Kyle Tucker, really similar, where all the underlying numbers were really, really good. It's just the early production for him in the major leagues wasn't sort of coming up. And now we see Tucker, I think, is the major league home run leader last time I looked.
I completely agree that we're absolutely nothing that we thought about Wyatt Langford before the season. I don't think there's anything that's really changed in that. And that's not just because it's so early in the season. I'd say that that's because what we've seen so far, overall, you're seeing kind of still the foundations of a really impact bat. There's still kind of questions about how much defensive value he's going to have, partly because he hadn't had a whole lot of need. The Rangers don't have a whole lot of need to get a whole lot of defensive value out of him when he's healthy. But I just look at Langford, and you look at the bat speed, the power potential, the swing decisions, the understanding of the strike zone, short swing. All these things are exactly what you're hoping to see, all what you're looking for. And by the way, Scott, I kind of wondered what you think about this too, but you mentioned this already with Skenes. We're already seeing it with Langford. One of the criticisms we've long heard with the MLB draft is the problem with the MLB draft, as opposed to all these other leagues, is the guys get drafted and then they disappear for 4 years before you ever hear about them again, unless you're reading Baseball America, paying really close attention to this kind of stuff. We're seeing this with the Skenes. We're seeing this with a Wyatt Langford. Nolan Schanuel, who I'm not as high on as a prospect, but we have Nolan Schanuel. Jacob Wilson's not that far away probably from getting the call if the A's really want to improve a shortstop down the road. You have these players who are getting there so quickly that kind of taking some of that away. And kind of one of the things that kind of does stand out with that to me is as we roll into this year's draft, I can't help but think, because the two teams, now maybe the Reds are on a tailspin right now. But you look at the Guardians, look at the Reds picking 1-2. Those are teams that are hoping to be in contention this year. Maybe it's a little different than it was years ago, where you're looking at a player who might be even able to help you come postseason time this year, which I say with Langford, because we thought that Langford was close to that last year.
I think that's important. And just from a marketing component, if we're trying to bring more fans into our sport on prospects, on draft picks, the more that you can relate it to the big league club, the better. I can still remember, what year was it? 2021 maybe, when the Angels picked 1 million pitchers in a row, right? Like, that sticks out. It doesn't even matter what the names were, but I remember that was a trend. And people are like, well, the Angels have had pitching problems, and you can even make a case that their owner didn't really believe in investing in pitching as much as he should. A new GM comes in and says, well, I'm just going to hammer pitching with all of my draft picks. I think now the way that you can spin this is what you said. Hey, Wyatt Langford, star in college ball, could be star in college, in not pro ball, in the major leagues next year. So how can he help your team on the short term? Not every player is going to apply to that, of course, especially the high school players. But I think the more that we can talk about how quickly those college players can get to the big leagues and what they can do right away, the better off it'll be. That also has to do with organizations, like you're saying, JJ. Hey, the Angels call players up super quickly. You can make the case they call them up too quickly. But this is a player we're talking about right now that might be up in the show next year or even this year, right? When he's drafted a couple months later with someone like Shanwell. So I think that's cool for a more casual fan to understand that this player is going to make an impact quickly. That's what the NBA and the NFL has over MLB. But MLB is catching up, right? That's the difference. We're seeing quicker call-ups now. Colleges are so advanced, some of them, that I think they're able to develop players to a level that gets them closer to the big leagues, and they don't have to spend 2 or 3 years toiling in the minor leagues if they're ready.
Everything old is new again. This is Bob Horner in 1977, I think it is, going straight from Arizona State to the Braves. This is, I used to be Arizona State. This is Mike Leake jumping straight into the Reds rotation, which is a lot more recently. But, you know, when we talk about this, is like you look at a Charlie Condon, you look at maybe a Travis Bazzana, guys like that, big bats who are going to be drafted at the top of this year's draft, and they're going to teams that, again, if you're the Guardians and you take Charlie Condon, which I know a lot of Guardian fans want to do, you got to be looking at him and saying, depending on what kind of start he gets, is this a guy who could help you in September in the postseason? Because let's be honest, Guardians have been a little lacking in offense when it comes to the postseason in recent years. This is a guy who might be able to help.
Yep.
And that's the kind of thing that we were never able to say a few years ago because we didn't have any examples of players who've done things like this.
Yeah, now we have many, and if they struggle, they struggle. They go down, they figure it out, and they come back up. And I think teams are becoming more comfortable with that. It's not like, oh, we have to be so precious that he can't struggle and we have to send him down and it'll kill his confidence. These kids are mostly pretty confident. Tons of draft talk over the next couple months leading up to our draft coverage, which will be special, I promise you, over in Arlington, Texas for All-Star Week. That's it for Hot Sheet. If you like the show, please subscribe to the YouTube channel, like this page, like this video, and also check out the podcast to rate and review what you like about it. For JJ Cooper and Geoff Pontes, I'm Scotty Braun. We'll see you next Tuesday live, 3 o'clock Eastern.